Hey guys, and welcome to episode 132 of the OCDStories.com podcast. Now in this episode, I interview Solome Tibebu. I had the honour and privilege of meeting Solome at the ICDF conference in 2017. In fact, we spoke together on a panel, so I got to know her story then. But in this episode, Solome shares her OCD story, and we unpack that, the journey, and obviously how she's kind of recovered from it and what she has to do today to maintain the life she wants to live in spite of OCD. And then we go on to talk about her initiative, Anxiety in Teens, and we ask some questions around team-based questions and questions for parents with teenagers. So I think I found Solome's story inspiring. I think she's a wonderful human being, so I'm glad I could share on this platform. And hopefully you find her story inspiring too. So without further ado, here is Solome. On the podcast today, I have Solome Tibebu, who has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us and talk about her initiative, Anxiety in Teens. Welcome to the show, Solome.
Thanks so much. So happy to be here.
No, it's good to have you on. And obviously we did a panel together at the conference last year, which was good fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and obviously you got to hear some of your story there, but it'd be good to share it with the audience. So as you're familiar with, I usually ask the person what their OCD story is, so in as little or as much detail as you want to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So my OCD story started on a dark, stormy night. I remember when things started going downhill for me. And while it wasn't OCD immediately, it certainly was the beginning of what was just broader anxiety that really led to OCD. And so it was in middle school. I was a good student. I had a great group of friends. I had outside activities that I was involved with, and so pretty much just your normal kid. And but I remember it was one summer evening where I was just really in the mood to do something special for my family. And so very bizarre. It's not my everyday thing as an adolescent to be this generous, but I just wanted to cook for my family and clean the entire house. And so I set about to do that. And I was dusting and sweeping and mopping and preparing the menu for what I would make my mom and dad. And I do recall that my mother said she would be running home late from work. And so I said, okay, fine. Let me just do the cleaning first, and then I'll get to the food next, so it's nice and warm by the time she gets home.
Yeah.
And so I prepare this chicken Alfredo dish, and I light the candles. I set everything out, and by the time it was 7 p.m., 7:30, I'm sitting back and waiting for her to come home. And now, of course, this thunderstorm rolls in, lightning and just heavy rain. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is weird. But regardless, I'm just sitting waiting. And then it's 8 o'clock, 8:30, and it's getting dark out. And I'm thinking, okay, what is going on? So finally, I end up going to my dad's garage or man cave, whatever you want to call it, where he's watching TV. And I say, "Hey, Dad, what's up with this?" And he just looks at me and says, "I don't know." And to this day, he doesn't think that he was making this solemn, fearful expression to me, but I took that to mean, oh my goodness, he thinks that something bad happened to her.
Yeah.
And so that I go into a tailspin and I go upstairs. I'm sweating. I'm so hot. I'm taking my sweatshirt off, and yet I'm so cold. I can't feel my hands and feet. My heart is beating out of my chest. And this was really my first experience with a panic attack. The timing was a blur. She eventually comes home. I'm so mad at her for not answering her phone, and we move on with life. But what happened was that this was the beginning of 2 years of separation anxiety, lots of panic attacks, and couldn't let my family out of my sight. And then eventually that turned into more obsessive compulsive symptoms.
Yeah.
And this was even more challenging for me because I started getting OCD thoughts around things like just really embarrassing, shameful things like, oh, if I don't do this a symmetrical way or even a even number of times,
Mm.
I'm going to become pregnant. And
Yeah.
as a 15-year-old who hasn't even hold hands with boys, trying to tell my father what my OCD was about, I knew that would just lead to two anxious people. And
Mm.
so I never ended up talking about it, and it was a secret for a lot longer than it needed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like the opening scene of a movie, the way you describe that. But yeah, I mean, I completely understand why you wouldn't, as a 15-year-old, want to tell your dad that you think you're pregnant. Um, yeah, okay. So, how did things? Well, I guess what happened from that point, where you ended?
So from there, I by this time my parents could identify that something was really wrong.
Yeah.
We were just calling it, she's got a complex of some sort.
Mm.
We didn't even know what it was called, and I'm half Polish and half Ethiopian, and neither of my parents even had a phrase for obsessive compulsive disorder in their languages, at least to their knowledge. And so that was definitely a barrier to getting the help that I needed eventually. But ultimately, they did get me to a therapist and tried medication. And looking back now, I tried 4 or 5 therapists and 4 or 5 medications until I could finally find the right fit.
Yeah.
And it's like I spent 1 to 2 years on medications and therapists that weren't working very well. But it's like when all you know is that, it's hard to know if there's anything better out there. So it
Yeah.
just goes to show that you've got to try a couple times potentially.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a good message. Yeah, so yeah, it could be find the right therapist for you. Obviously, the right form of therapy as well, and obviously, sometimes different medications affect different people. But is there any reason why the therapists you saw over the 2 years didn't work? Were they non CBT? Were they not doing ERP? Was there any, or did anyone? Or I guess at this point, had anyone identified that it was OCD?
A great question. I so a couple different diagnoses. One said the very first one, you have generalized anxiety
Mm.
with panic attacks and maybe obsessive thoughts. Another one later said, "Oh, you definitely have panic disorder," but that was it. And it wasn't until later that I got the diagnoses of OCD, but up until that time, didn't even think to find an OCD specialist and didn't understand how ERP could be more effective than some of these other treatment modalities. And that definitely led to a delay in seeking someone out.
Yeah. Okay. What, if you don't mind me asking, what sort of age was it that you finally found the therapist that fitted you?
Yeah, I want to say it wasn't until late high school
Yeah.
that I finally found a great therapist. And one of the things that he really did was, of course, being an OCD specialist, we did more ERP exercises um, and did exposures for obsessive thoughts and compulsions. But also, he really inspired me to seek out and understand how does OCD work? What's going on? And so I was the type of kid where when other kids were at the movies on Friday nights, I was sitting at the local bookstore reading as much about anxiety and OCD as I possibly could have.
Mm.
And this was just so important because me reading about that and gaining that psychoeducation about how OCD works, it was so powerful for me that when I was in my distressing situations, I was much more able to create space and pause and start accepting, okay, wait a minute, I somebody in my family didn't die because I didn't do something a certain way. Maybe I have obsessive compulsive disorder
Mm.
where this is what happens and this is what I should do next. And and so that cognitive restructuring process was so important as part of my managing the OCD.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm so glad you said that. I think that's such an important message that doesn't get kind of drummed home enough. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because, some people say, oh, self-help, psychoeducation doesn't work. And I kind of disagree with that, as you've just said. When knowledge is power, as cheesy and as cliche as that quote is,
Right.
if you can understand the underpinnings and the workings of the mechanics of anxiety and OCD, you can better spot it when it's happening and learn to let it go easier than someone who doesn't have a clue what's going on in their head. It's going to be far more terrifying.
Yep. Yes. I agree to all of the above what you said, and helped also to just normalize what I was
Yeah,
experiencing. The anxiety about having OCD and having it come back, and it helped with all of those things.
excellent. No, thank you for that. And was there a particular book that really stood out for you?
Oh yeah, was it Jeffrey Schwartz's book?
Oh,
The
Brain Lock?
Yeah, that was the first one that was really so important for me. Um, and then a little later on, discovered the mindfulness workbook for
Mm,
OCD. John Hirschfield really enjoyed those exercises. But yeah, the brain lock one was just the very first one.
excellent. Yeah. Um, okay. And so you mentioned obviously psychoeducation. Was there anything else you did that made a difference in terms of like lifestyle changes?
Yes. I don't know to what extent um, all of these outside factors impacted or at least triggered OCD coming back or flaring up. But I am convinced that when I do let a lot of things go, especially all at once, like
Mm,
I get really stressed out at work and I stop working out, I'm drinking a lot of caffeine to get more hours in the day, to accomplish more, relationships start unraveling. It seems like that can oftentimes create the perfect storm for
yeah.
the OCD to be aggravated. And I'm pretty convinced that's a thing now, just seeing the trends personally.
Yeah. Absolutely. So kind of monitoring various things that may create I guess, an ideal OCD environment, be that caffeine or stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And I see that you run a lot. Facebook stalking
Yes.
you. Um,
That's what I was going to say.
yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, is running something related to mental health for you, or is it primarily physical?
Stuart, it's funny. As a middle schooler, my mother had this rule for my sister and I and said, you need one extracurricular activity for your mind and another
Mm,
for your body. And I wasn't really taking her very seriously. I was just, brushing her off. And so she was threatening me. She said, I'm going to sign you up for cross country running if you don't choose something. And I pushed it off, and lo and behold, she goes ahead and signs me up, and I'm just so frustrated. I'm miserable. I'm thinking this is so boring. I can't believe I'm doing this, just dragging my feet in seventh grade. But ended up being so impactful for my anxiety that I stuck with it throughout middle school, was captain of the track team, continued running in college, and then ran 2 marathons because it was so good,
mm.
just for managing my anxiety. So definitely an advocate now.
Awesome. No, that's good to hear. And what do you think it is about running that helps you with anxiety?
Yeah, I think, well, maybe a couple things. I just get some time alone,
Mm,
and I always get ENTJ on the Myers-Briggs and stuff like that. But I really do think I'm an introvert, and just so one, getting that space to myself, um, just really important time alone. But also the opportunity to just express all of those emotions.
mm.
It's you can tell if I'm having a bad day by how far I run, and it's so soothing in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, so kind of time alone and allowing you to express emotions through. Is that so? I'm just curious. Is that so? When I run, I don't do it as much as I used to, but is a very much a physical release of any emotion that's within me. Is that kind of what you mean?
Hands down, absolutely. Yeah, I've heard my old cross-country running peers say, "You're not a real runner if you can't do it without music." But just with my iPod and the running, I really get to process a lot of my thoughts and express that emotion. And certainly, it's definitely a release and so important for me. It's a unique experience in that way.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's really good to hear. It has that impact. So, I guess how does OCD affect you now? And I guess how do you kind of deal with it when it does flare up?
It's a great question. So I had, as I mentioned, this bad anxiety as a teen, and then as a teenager, went and started the nonprofit Anxiety in Teens, and that helped me and helped others. And from there, was speaking across the country about to schools and universities and associations, and was a huge mental health advocate, sharing my story quite outspokenly. And but then it wasn't until a decade later, just a few years ago, while living in New York, that I was surprised to find that my OCD came back in full force. And it was really shocking and jarring to me because even as somebody who was so outspoken about my story and just really well versed in mental health and anxiety and OCD, or so I thought, I found that even I fell into the trap that this was a teenage phase, and I am going to go and march across the country and tell my story about how I overcame it, and you can too. And then so it was really humbling. And not only now did I have to deal with the OCD itself and start that process all again, but there was also this acceptance around the fact that this is going to be a chronic condition that I'd be managing for really the rest of my life. And so that was really challenging for me. But eventually I turned the corner and said, you know what, I've managed this once before. I'm going to do it again. And started thinking back and going back to all of those tried and true evidence-based strategies that helped me the first time. But of course, this time around, I could short circuit a few things, like, for example, seeking out an OCD specialist right away. And so that made it easier. But that was a pretty big epiphany for me, and really changed my mindset about a lot of things.
Yeah, no, really good point. And well, you just mentioned epiphany. That's going to be my next question. So maybe we'll get onto that. But yeah, you made a good point about when it came back, you had the realization of, oh, I just do what helped me the first time. And I feel, I've heard it many times. People have contacted me, or I've seen it in forums where people said, I've had a relapse or a lapse and I don't know what to do. And it's do what you did the first time, because if something you did once helped you, you can do it twice. If you do it twice, you can do it 3 times. It's not suddenly going to become ineffective. So yeah, that's exactly good. Yeah, it's good that you had that. So I will ask anyway, in case there's anything else. So, which is, what's the biggest epiphany for you in your recovery?
Yeah, I think outside of that, surprise of it coming back so full force, I will also say there was just, I'm sure this is probably true of depression and anxiety and other issues too, but I had so much just anxiety and sadness around the road ahead, and just having been through it again, it's like, oh, I know what the next however long is, what it's going to entail and the work. But and so I really was suffering with that knowledge. But then I did have the epiphany that while it may seem like my patience has reduced, my resilience has increased so much more than the first time around. And I really do have more emotional and intellectual resources around how to manage OCD than I ever did the first time. And so I also have to remember that, and that really does um, just keeping that in mind is a huge shift from telling myself things like, "Oh, I can't do it again,"
Yeah.
or anything like that.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It's kind of like I'm stronger because of this. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Mm.
excellent. So, was there like a big roadblock at any point on your OCD journey, and if so, how did you overcome it?
A big roadblock. I think one that immediately comes to mind is my just impatience around the process. Uh, I've found that, so if anyone who knows me, I'm always doing a million things, and
Hmm.
I like to get things done quickly and start things, um, and so my patience with stuff, especially things that are not only irritating but downright tormenting, it's very limited. And and I think that looking back, my trying to rush things or have such huge expectations that I could just get over something so debilitating in a couple days, that's unrealistic pressure that really hindered the process more than helped or even steady stated it. So that was a big barrier. Another one I'll say is like I mentioned earlier, my parents they didn't know what OCD was, and but they did go out of their way to do absolutely everything they could to help support me. And so it makes me think about the folks who just who don't have the language around OCD yet and don't have the resources. There are a lot of things that can absolutely stand in people's way, but I've been fortunate to have a lot of resources to help me manage.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so I guess to someone just starting there, we'll leave it open to general anxiety, being OCD, anxiety separation, whatever it is. The person starting their journey of treating it, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I just felt so unique in what I was going through. The content of my OCD was so embarrassing, and it really took a long time to finally open up to the therapist. But what I would tell you is that the first and foremost, of course, go find a mental health professional that really has an expertise in what you're dealing with. But once you do connect with them, and if you do feel like you're comfortable, know that they have seen far more unique and quirky things than you can imagine. And so, literally, just this sort of thing is there every day, and there's no need to be ashamed. And, putting that kind of pressure on yourself is only going to slow you down from getting the help you need.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really, really good piece of advice. And as you say, a specialist in OCD really has heard it all. So
Hmm.
you're going to be hard pushed to shock them. Okay, so tell us a bit about your initiative, Anxiety in
Hmm.
Teens.
Yeah, thanks. So like I said earlier, struggling with anxiety and OCD for a few years as a teen. By the time I was 16 years old, already had OCD symptoms in addition to the panic attacks. And um, as I was researching all about OCD and anxiety and gaining that psychoeducation from books and articles, part of me thought, why can't teens everywhere access this kind of stuff?
Mm.
And then meanwhile, I was also Googling on the web anything that I could find to help me in my time of need, especially to make me feel like I wasn't the only teen in the world going through this. And I was just surprised to find that there wasn't that much out there, at least that community or camaraderie with other young people. And so that's when I said I'd go ahead and start it myself.
Yeah.
And so started this website, anxietyandteens.org, as really the first youth-led resource for other teens online that were struggling with mental health issues. And that was in 2006. And I continued to blog, and I stuck with it because it was just so helpful for me personally to write and publish that stuff. But it wasn't until later that I started getting other young adults to contribute to the site that I realized it wasn't just about who would be reading it, but that process going through and researching the condition and then writing the personal testimony around it. I started learning more, and it turned out that expressive writing, there's actually quite a bit of research showing the therapeutic benefits of that. And so today, Anxiety in Teens, we have young adults across the country who participate in seasonal programs where they're writing for the site while doing a virtual support group, if you will, with a facilitator to be able to connect with others who are going through what they're dealing with too.
Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, it's a great site. And I agree with the whole collaborative, no worries, the collaborative process and stuff. Okay, so obviously I'll put a link in the show notes to your website if people can go check it out. But I guess kind of what advice do you have for, I guess just generally for teens with anxiety?
Yeah, I would say, I know it sounds like I keep saying this over and over, but really understanding what is the specific issue you're dealing with, whether it's OCD or some other condition. That you said it earlier best, knowledge is power. It really does put you in the position of, oh, okay, this is a defined thing. I'm not the first person in the world to deal with it. There is a path for treatment where these things can absolutely be manageable. And so it's out there. And the more you know about it, the more you know what to look for, and the more you know what to practice and what skills to reinforce to keep that OCD and anxiety at bay. And so whether it is through listening to podcasts like this one or websites like Anxiety in Teens, and getting a balance of reading evidence-based content, outlining what are proper treatment protocols, in addition to getting involved with some kind of peer support network. May that be as little as reading other stories online to actually finding a local support group or going to events like the International OCD Foundation's annual conference. It's a really, really powerful experience to be able to hear those firsthand stories. So that would be just really my main takeaway.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And yeah, like you said, getting around others is really important. I think for anyone of any age, there's that kind of, I'm not the only one, and also sharing kind of wisdom and knowledge. Okay, so similar question then. So for any parents listening who have teenagers or young children, what advice can you give them that how they can better support their teenager?
Yeah, great question. A couple things. First, especially with OCD, you might find that your teen is not super excited about telling you all of the details of what they're going through. And there was certainly a period in my teen years where my dad here, on one hand, he's funding my ability to go see a therapist, but on the other hand, he's hurt and asking me, Solome, how can you go speak to this stranger, this therapist you barely know, and tell her all about your OCD, but you can't even talk to me? And I think it's important to know that just getting your teen or your child the help they need first and foremost, that's the first step. And then from there, maybe they'll be at a point where they want to talk about it more, but maybe not. It's good to keep in mind that it's not about you, and you're doing all the right things, and they're not talking. They may not be sharing and disclosing stuff with you, not because they don't love you, but maybe it's just hard for them to articulate their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, especially with OCD. It's just, it's hard and it's exhausting trying to explain things again and again to people who just can't understand sometimes. So that's
Absolutely.
really important to think about.
Yeah, because there can be a lot of shame, right? As you
Yes,
experience with the pretend, I don't know how to say it. Would you say pretend pregnancy or fake pregnancy or
exactly.
yeah, so obviously you don't know what's going on. You feel it's real. So there's that shame there, and for other people with other taboo thoughts, sexual violent intrusive thoughts, even contamination can be shameful.
Right.
Yeah, so it's nothing personal. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Was there anything else on that?
Yeah. So, not feeling like you're out of the loop, not because they don't care, but in addition to that, know that this will be a bit of a journey.
Mm.
There are going to be ups and downs, and so the progress is a zigzag. And I think parents can get discouraged easily when there are flare-ups again, but know that things are trending upward over time as your child gets more information and practices the skills that they're learning, whether that be CBT type of methods, ERP, whatever that may be with their clinician. But just reminding yourself that this is going to be a journey,
Yeah.
and the more patience and compassion that you can give yourself as a parent, that will really help ease everyone's anxiety.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant point. But it's a journey over time. It's not, success isn't a straight line. It's a zigzag, as you
Right.
say. And yeah, that's a good point of just making sure over a longer period that the trend line is generally going up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess a good way of doing that is maybe if anyone listening to just track progress, however you feel best to do that. You can then look back over a 3-month period and then assess how well it's gone, as opposed to week by week. It's maybe harder to distinguish between successes and struggles.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, cool. So next is sort of a general question. So
Mhm.
you're in an elevator, maybe at the ICF conference in a week or so, and someone obviously acknowledges you from wherever your TED talk. Again, I'll put the link to that in the show notes, or this podcast or whatever. And they generally just ask you for a bit of advice around OCD. What would you tell them?
Mhm. Yeah. First, I would, I'm at the point where I'm happy, and if it was at a setting like that, I'd jump at the opportunity to let them know that I too have dealt with this and have
Mm.
had my ups and downs, um, because I'm gonna guess they're not gonna be meeting people like that every day,
No.
and so really would be thrilled to share that, but would also thank them for their courage to disclose that kind of information. It's just, like I said earlier, it's not easy to do. And you've got to, depending on what sort of situation you're in, whether it's a personal relationship or a professional setting, just having some, I guess, being thoughtful about where you want to disclose OCD, that is important.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to discount how much energy and courage that takes. So I'd probably say something around that too. But then I would recommend some of these resources that I mentioned earlier. If they haven't already picked up some of these books, like my personal favorite, that Brain Locked one,
Mm.
or John Hirschfield, I'm pretty sure he might be at the conference. So,
He will be,
um,
yeah.
okay, yeah, that's just gaining that psychoeducation is really the first step for me, and so that'd probably be the first thing I would tell them to seek out.
Awesome. Yeah. And then, yeah, I mean, I think the thing we haven't said about psychoeducation is, and I remember being a 17-year-old and I just did not like reading. So when the clinical psychologist was like, you need to do some reading, I was like, hell no. Um, uh, and I guess some teenagers love reading and others will run from it like the plague.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah.
but
Uh,
the
Sorry, go.
good news is there are lots of digital tools out
That's
there
true.
too.
Yeah.
So, like
Audiobooks.
Audiobooks, No CD app is a good one. Great supplements to seeing a professional.
Absolutely. Yeah, really good point. And I think that is a good thing about the era we live in is teenagers don't have an excuse. There's many different mediums for that information that we maybe didn't have. Well, I'm a bit older than you, so I definitely didn't have. Okay, so if you could pick up the phone and call your 20-year-old self, what would you tell that young lady?
Oh, wow. I would just say, first and foremost, like this little blog thing that you're starting is going to actually continue and sustain and grow and impact a lot of people. So stick with it even when you're not in the mood or you don't feel like it's making a difference. Especially sharing your story. I know that it's going to be exhausting sometimes. And certainly there have been periods in my life where I said, oh, I'm kind of done with this. I'm too tired to talk about OCD anymore. And especially when you get like, it starts feeling good again. One of the first things I wanted to do was just end therapy and say, okay, great, I can finally focus on having my life back. But then of course that's not a good method either, not putting my maintenance strategies in place. And then the flare-ups came back again. I thought, oh shoot, okay, let me go back. But I guess back to my point, just there's certainly had been points where I was too tired to keep sharing my stories, but then I was reminded how important it was to continue speaking out and talking about my personal story as I got people coming up to me or emailing me saying what a difference it's made. And so that was just is more powerful than anything. And so really revives my energy to continue speaking out. And so certainly I would advise a younger me to remember that as I get discouraged or tired.
Yeah, no, really good advice. And so the next question is, you've got a billboard in San Francisco. What do you want written on that billboard for everyone to see?
Yeah, if I had a billboard and the opportunity to say anything, my message would be around the fact that OCD is so much more than what it's portrayed as in the media today. There's still so much confusion and misconception that OCD is just a quirky person who is hand washing and super organized. And as you know, the content of OCD could be literally millions of trillions different things and not what people expect it to be today. So definitely would love to share more information about what OCD is and what OCD is not.
Absolutely, that would be a very important billboard in both my country and yours, and I'm sure every other country listening. Okay, so no, thank you for that. And is there anything else that you wish you could say that I haven't asked you?
Just that I'm so excited for resources like this. You've impacted so many people, Stuart, with this podcast, and I'm thrilled that I could be a part of it.
Thank you, Solome, and obviously thank you for being on it and making it what it is. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Solome. And quick disclaimer, this podcast is not therapy, it's not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care, guys.